Okay, I want to introduce Paul Naton to everybody. And I'm sure, in fact, he probably doesn't need an introduction because I think most of us have seen maybe 5 of your videos each. We just super appreciate the work he's done because he dives into topics that we are near and dear to our hearts, but he dives into it to a level that we can't find on the internet, can't find it anywhere else. So I've just really grown to appreciate him, and I was just thrilled to make contact with him and see if we could get him to talk about some of his new videos that are coming out and what he's been working on, in particular a glider setup, which is something I've been doing quite a bit of lately. So Paul, I'm gonna pass the video to you and get this crossed over.
I'll just give an overview of some of the glider tuning stuff I've been working on lately. Last year I came out probably 10 years ago with an initial, beginner's guide to tuning an airplane, some basic troubleshooting, that kind of thing. And, that sold probably 10,000 copies over the years. But I really wanted to dive a little bit deeper into, some of the more esoteric aspects of tuning. Because, I go to the flying field and guys go, can you test out my glider for me? And these guys who have watched the first video, so at least they should have some sort of basics. And they kind of did, but they go, I go and fly their glider, and there's so many things messed up on it. I go, these guys are really, and it's not really the radio setup per se. It has a lot to do with just the initial building of the airplane and the mechanical setup. So now when people go, well, can you fly my airplane? I go, well, no, you need to land it first because we need to go through that airplane on the ground first and just kind of see how your mechanical setup is. And then we're going to look at how your radio is programmed. And I don't even care about the CG or anything like that. No, let's put the airplane in the air and sort of get a feel for, how the airplane handling is. What are some basic trouble spots? And the main thing I work on is the pitch control of the airplane. Gliders, everything is about the elevator. And I don't care what the CG is. I don't care if the airplane can roll or you don't have enough rudder mix or whatever. You want to get that pitch feel set correctly. So you're not moving the pitch axis on your stick, you're not moving it a ton. You want to have the airplane pretty sensitive around center because the more you have to move that stick for pitch, the less accurate you're going to be. So the precision tuning video I released last year kind of goes into that. And I also spent a lot of time on VTL setups because VTLs are kind of coming back in style again, as they always do. And there's just a lot of mythology built around VTLs and how to get them to fly correctly. These days the VTLs are actually designed correctly. They have the volumes figured out. We have these really long tail moments now, so the VTL volume is not super critical. Usually the VTL volume needs to be about the same as the cross tail, but for the longer booms and flying at aft CGs, it's not as critical. So I spent a lot of time in that first video talking about VTL differentials and setting up the mechanical system. And in all my build videos as well, I spent a lot of time on the elevator control system and getting that set up correctly, because if you don't have the mechanics and the physics set up of the pushrod system of the elevator, once you go to tune your CG and do your radio setups, if that's not correct first, it's going to be much more difficult to fine tune those other aspects down the line. So, basic things like, having a big enough servo on the elevator, not skimping on that. So, and, a digital servo, of course, because that just makes a huge difference, digital versus analog. And high voltage, if you can do it, though I found that's not also super critical. Volts missing here and there is not going to make a big difference on how the feel is. But it's running that clevis, having that horn as short as possible on the elevator, because you want to maximize, this is, true for any servo. You want to maximize the servo's resolution through maximizing the travel. So you want to have the servo go through its, pretty close to its full mechanical travel limit. So if the servo can do 90, max stick deflection up or down, you want that servo going pretty close to that full 90 of 45 one way, 45 the other. When you do that, you get the most resolution out of the servo. Even digital, it doesn't matter whether analog or digital, especially important if it's an analog to do that. But even a digital really gains a lot of resolution from having that clevis or that push point as close to the center axle of the servo as possible. So whether it's a DLG or a F5J ship, that's just super critical. And that one thing alone, having that tight, is going to make your elevator just feel so much more linear and just better feeling. So if you can do that, so you know, when I get someone's plane I'm test flying, you know, I'll pop the hatch open, and the first thing I'll see about 80% of the time is they have, you know, this huge horn on the elevator, and it's out, you know, 3 or 4 holes on that servo arm. So I go, well, first thing we're going to do is we're going to move that inside if we can. But, you know, that comes down to building too. You want to have that rod lead fairly into that servo well. So you have to set the servo, you know, to run that inside hole, and especially critical on DLGs. I mean, I usually drill extra holes closer to the axle from the arms to get it even closer and get more resolution. So, you know, if you look at my pitch volumes on my radio, you know, they're at least 100% up and down, if not more, to get that full travel, that full deflection. So I go through the guy's plane, you know, look at the flap linkages too, make sure the leverage is correct. You know, it's not as critical to run inside because, you know, flaps, we need more throw. So you're going to have to throw away a little resolution, but that doesn't matter because the flaps aren't moving that much anyway, and we don't need resolution for deploying the flaps for landing anyway. Ailerons, not as critical as well, but you want to still have, you know, your optimal mechanical advantage on the ailerons. So I'll check that out on the guy's wing and make sure that's all tight. Invariably, I'll find, you know, areas of slop, like one aileron has a ton of slop in it, the other one's tight. So that one side, that left side, is not going to center really well. Now I'll look at his rudder too and make sure he's, you know, again, maximizing the resolution on the moving surfaces as much as possible. So, you know, that's kind of the benchmark, and the precision tuning, I really spend a lot of time going through that and also showing the radio programming setup to maximize all these resolutions. So, you know, whatever surface we're setting up, get that resolution set first, get the volumes in the radio set next, then we go flying and, you know, see how the airplane handles it. Again, I don't care about the roll of the airplane. I don't care about how effective the rudder is. I want to feel that pitch. So we'll put the airplane up and just feel how much stick it takes, you know, to get the airplane to make these pitch changes. You know, does the airplane maintain a trim? If I put 3 flicks of down trim, you know, how effective is that trim? Does the plane hold trim? Does it want to run away, down or up? That kind of thing. So we'll get that worked out on the radio. We get that pitch feel set first, and you can play with the CG after that, but usually I'll go into roll configurations. I don't care about the camber yet. I don't care about elevator to camber mixing or rudder mix as well. So get the elevator to fly, get that airplane to trim perfectly, be very responsive on the elevator, but not too twitchy and not real dead. So probably 80% of the time when I get on a guy's airplane, he's going to have a ton of roll and no pitch, or a ton of pitch, so it's so twitchy that even I, who like twitchy airplanes, cannot fly it. I cannot hold, you know, a pitch line with the elevator. So he's got that pitchy, but then the airplane's completely dead in roll. So he's having to move the stick a lot in one direction, but not the other. That just makes for a pretty inaccurate flying. So I'll take a look at that balance, and we'll get those things balanced closer together. So the aileron kind of has the same sort of linear feel as the elevator. So we'll get the plane starting to track well in pitch, and then roll, get those balanced out, and kind of fine tune that to the pilot's skill level, because you know, a pilot with less skill level, you don't want to give them a very twitchy airplane. You know, you can use the dual rates to deaden that down a little bit. That's kind of one overlooked thing as well, using the dual rates as kind of like a sub-flight trim mode to be able to fine tune the airplane. Just, you know, crank up those volumes and get it maybe a little too pitchy, use the dual rates with a little reduced rate to see if that feels better to you. So kind of matching the roll and the pitch to the pilot's skill. Really good pilot, half CG, you know, get it so it's pretty sensitive around stick. So when he's flying the airplane, he's really not moving his stick very much, which means he's actually being pretty accurate with the surface movements that flying the airplane around. You know, then we'll work on camber to elevator mix, which will help the pitch response of the airplane as well, especially with some of the more modern stuff. And then we'll work on the rudder mix. You know, the whole coordinated roll thing is a little bit further down on my tuning list. You know, we'll start working on differentials, usually starting with 0 differential and working up instead of starting with a lot of differential and working down towards 0. Especially with the modern airplanes with the bigger surfaces, the differential ratios have come down quite a bit. So a lot of stuff like new Explorers and Maxes and stuff, very little differential is really needed because we have these big rudders now, and we want to make the rudder do more of the work as far as getting a coordinated turn. The ailerons are draggy. Rudder is not so draggy as long as it's not deflecting too much. Then kind of get some rudimentary mixes set up. Kind of last on the list is actually then fine-tuning the CG. And you know, as long as it's in the ballpark, test flying airplane, it could be way, way too nose heavy, and that's something you can pretty much feel right away. But get that elevator feel kind of set up in the ballpark first, get the airplane to roll, do roll and pitch together, and then start working with the CG and moving the CG back. And I think about 2 out of 100 planes I test fly have the CG too far back. It's usually quite the opposite. You know, people are being careful, but they're usually pretty amazed that they can move the CG back. Most guys go, well, you know, I tried that aft CG, but the plane, I just couldn't, you know, it's just too touchy. Well, when you go and look at their mechanical setups, that's where the problem was, because they weren't getting very much resolution out of the servo, or there was some double neutral in the elevator, or some sort of slop in the system. So as they move the CG back, you know, pitch response gets increased, and if there's any issues with resolution or slop, all that stuff gets amplified, and that just makes the plane kind of unflyable. So once we get the mechanicals fixed, they go, well, let's move the CG back 5 millimeters. And they go, what? And they go, no, trust me, we'll move it 5 millimeters back. Now we have the elevator system nice. And you'll see, you know, we'll put the airplane up, you'll see it's totally flyable now. And it's like, oh yeah, it's a totally different airplane, just moving the CG back 5 mils. Because now we have response of the airplane, but it's not twitchy. He's not moving the stick very much to fly the airplane. And people just get so scared of that aft CG that makes the airplane just fly so much better and become, you know, more responsive to the air. It's just a thing, but again, it's just step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4 to tuning, and that's kind of what this last tuning video is all about. Well, that's long. Any questions?
Okay, cool. Here's some questions.
You say you like the aftward CG. How does that relate to doing a dive test?
No, that's a great question, because I actually covered the dive test pretty in depth in this precision tuning video, because over the 30 years of flying I've done, I pretty much don't do the dive test anymore, because it can give you some false results. That might be 1 of 5 or 6 sort of handling tests I'll give the airplane. But the dive test most guys do, they have an airplane, again, with the elevator system not set up right or not trimmed correctly in the first place, and they do a dive test. They dive the plane too fast, they go past, you know, the L over D speed, and, you know, airplanes bend in flight, and, you know, things happen, you know, how much twist you have in the wings can cause the airplane to pitch down. High camber wings actually want to pitch down the faster the airplane goes. So you think, oh, the plane's pitching down, it must be tail heavy, but it's quite the opposite. So the dive test can really fool you. So one of the tests that I do is called the inverted dive test, which is kind of the same. But it's a little
Brave.
No. You would think that's crazy, but it's super easy. I explained it in the video. You take the airplane at a nice cruise speed, no camber, and just roll the airplane 180 and put it on its back. Flying level, you're not diving. Okay, you put it on its back, let it fly level, and see how much stick it takes to keep that airplane flying at the same speed upside down along that flight line. Now, super nose heavy airplane, it's going to take a lot of forward stick to keep that airplane flying. If it's more CG neutral, it'll take less and less stick. Most of my airplanes take a little bit of down stick to 0 down stick to keep that airplane flying at a cruise speed inverted. Of course, you know, your speed's going to bleed off pretty quick, but just in a few seconds, you can tell how much stick it's going to take. When it's nose heavy, you might have half down stick and pitch to keep that airplane tracking along that inverted flight line. So it just exaggerates and shows you a little bit quicker, you know, the CG condition of your airplane.
So Paul, you were talking about mixing the rudder and the ailerons. I hear two experts tell me both ways, but one is you should fly a lot with your left thumb, just controlling the rudder, and then just add aileron with the right hand as needed, right thumb. Or others say you should just mix it and not worry about your left thumb too much. Do you have any opinions about that? Like maybe
No,
how
absolutely.
much? Oh, pardon? What was that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah, the answer is yes.
Well, yes, both answers are right. Both of them were right. So yes, you should learn to fly with your left thumb, especially lower altitudes, because that kind of shows you how effective your rudder really is. Some airplanes, you can have a ton of rudder cranked in and it doesn't yaw very much.
Yeah.
Polyhedroplanes, if they have either too little or too much polyhedral brake in the wings, they get weird with the rudder. Low level, sometimes you need to push the airplane around beyond what a true, low drag coordinated turn is. Sometimes you want to slip the airplane, and sometimes you want to skid it. Now, skidding's yawing inside of the turn, and skidding is outside of the turn. And sometimes you need to horse that airplane around, be damned with the aerodynamics. You need to get that plane turned around to get back in that little piece of lift you just flew through. And if you don't do that, your plane's not going to get back in it quick enough, and it's going to be gone. So sometimes you have to, use the power of the rudder to get the airplane to configure itself quickly. I don't care how much drag it's producing, because it is, and you're side slipping the fuselage any which way. But you'd be surprised how you get interactions between also the pitch and the rudder. You crank a rudder on a lot of planes, you get what's called pitch coupling. So it actually pushes the tail down. And some airplanes, it's pretty effective to overcrank the rudder and then pull back stick without even using the ailerons to be able to get that fuselage turned around super quick and get back in that little piece of area you just flew through.
So in normal flying, should it have enough mix that you just can fly it with your right thumb, and it will work fine? And then you add rudder when you need more than that?
Yes.
Okay. Another yes.
I mean, yeah, you should have a mix set up so in any of your flight modes, you can just fly single stick. Sometimes your coordinated turn may not be super perfect, but I'm not really thinking about that when I'm thermaling. I'm focused on putting the plane in the best part of the air the highest percentage of the time. And sometimes if I need to get on the left stick with my thumb and to make the airplane to do that, great. But most of the time, if your airplane's set up right, you're not moving the stick much anyway. So think about your mix when you're really not moving that aileron stick much. You're not getting much mix either. So mix, absolutely. At far distances, you can't really tell what the fuselage is doing yaw-wise on your left thumb. You can take a guess, but if you have the mix set up right, the mix will be kind of doing most of the work, and it's going to get you, 80 to 90% of the correct amount of rudder you need for a coordinated turn. So, but remember, when you're banked up, you may need opposite aileron to keep that bank angle and that turn radius in the thermal. So what's happening with your mix? It's going opposite. So you're basically putting your airplane in a slip in that turn. So that's where the left thumb comes in handy. You watch it, if you have, a couple millimeters of stick movement opposite aileron, you can dial in that rudder with your left thumb. If I move that left stick 2 millimeters, I'm going to at least cancel out that mix and maybe get a little extra rudder to kick into that turn.
Okay, thank you.
The answer is yes on both.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions right now? Oh, John, go ahead.
Yeah. Paul, can you hear me?
I might repeat it. We have a question, Paul. Can you hear John here?
Yeah, I couldn't hear that one.
Okay. Why don't you say
on your side?
Just say it, night, or if it's complicated, come on over.
Sure.
Okay.
Hey, Paul, is that any better? Can you hear me any better?
Yeah, I can hear better.
Yeah. First of all, Paul, I'm a big fan. I've got a stack of your DVDs, and without you, I wouldn't really be able to build or repair an airplane. So thank you very much for all your efforts.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask you a question about an alternate method to adjusting the CG. And I, along with you, I do not like the dive test. But one of the techniques that I learned recently from a fellow named Pierre Mounier of DLG fame, he said the way he adjusts his CG is he gets his DLG flying along, just straight, level, and then he wiggles the elevator up and down. And if the nose stands still and the tail goes up and down, it's nose heavy. If the tail stands still and the nose goes up and down, it's tail heavy. Does that make any sense to you? It seems to really work.
I have not heard of that method. It seemed to be.
Give it a shot.
It would be very hard to judge the movement of your boom or your nose flying by without a slow-mo camera or something to see that.
Oh no, it's radical. You can really see it.
Yeah, I'll have to try that.
Yeah, the nose will just stand perfectly still, and the tail surface will go up and down. You'll really see it rotating around the nose, and that says your nose heavy. Yeah. And then if you're tail heavy, the tail will stand perfectly still, and the nose will go up and down. And that'll get you, if you get it so it just kind of rotates about the center of the fuselage, it's a pretty good CG. But I will say, you like to push it back a little bit so it's a little more tail heavy. Give it a shot, let me know. Put it in your next video.
Yeah, I'm a little skeptical for a couple of reasons, just because, you have things like tail moment, wing chord, nose moment between the CG and the nose. Those are all variables from plane to plane, and I'm not quite sure, pumping the elevator up and down, like how much are you pumping that elevator up and down to get those changes? And the CG range on a DLG is so small. We're talking, like on my Snipe, 3 millimeters is a huge difference between having the airplane not handle well and being very very energy sensing. So like the inverted dive test I explained earlier, that's just one of the tests that I'll do just to get the airplane in a rough ballpark. I've flown long enough, so the first 10 seconds I put any new airplane in the air, I can kind of tell if it's nose heavy or not just by how the pitch feels. But I put the airplane in a circling, like a thermal turn, and circle it. And I'll set the max elevator throw with the CG coming back. So I can hold full backstick and have the airplane wrap in a turn at full backstick without the thing snapping out. The more nose heavy a plane is, the less tight of a radius you can do, high pitch, high bank angle thermal turn. So, and also with a CG change, when I'm changing it aft, I want the airplane to change energy states rapidly. That's one of the tricks when you're reading air, when you're flying through a patch of air. The more nose heavy the airplane is, the less likely it is to actually change speeds. It wants to sort of stay in one trimmed airspeed at all times. As you get more and more towards a neutral point on the airplane setup, the airplane is going to change when it comes into different vertical velocities of air, and that plane is really going to change how it feels on the elevator. It'll go from super mushy and sink to suddenly super lively, but in a very rapid rate of time. So, once I have my CG in the ballpark, I have no idea really how many millimeters back it is, because I fine-tune that completely by feel, playing with the elevator pitch ratios, the servo throw, and just basic handling characteristics and how it, reads energy and how it handles in a turn at high, high CL, high lift angles on the airplane. And once I get it, maybe I'll put a mark on there to set where my aft CG is, because I like to explore, where's that critical point where it is going to be too far back. And, I usually pay no attention to whatever the factory settings are or anybody else's. I go out and fly the airplane and just set it by the way I like it. So, and that's not going to be this, correct one for everybody, but yeah, okay. It's all
very good.
Control.
Thank you very much. Could I ask you to clarify something you said earlier? And
sure.
That is on differential. When you're setting the differential on a DLG, how do you use it? What do you use as your indicator? Whether you should go to positive or negative differential, how much to use? Do you have any tips on that?
Sure. The modern DLGs don't need much differential these days. That's partly because of the longer tail boom moments we have and the larger rudder surfaces. They just don't, you want you want the rudder to do much, especially on DLG, more of the coordinated turn work than the ailerons, because the short span, the ailerons are fairly draggy on a short span of a DLG. So you want that rudder to really work. So, I started at 0 for all modern DLGs with 0 differential, and I'll just play with the rudder mix first, and how much rudder it really takes. Because you put a DLG up and you put 30 degrees of rudder in, you'll see that at 10 degrees, not much happens. At 20 degrees, you start getting some yaw control to the fuselage, but after that, nothing happens. And then now the rudder is just a big drag bucket back there. So, and that's where the aileron throw comes in. If we need different, if I see that I have a mix in, or I'm using my left thumb, and consistently the airplane's wanting to have differential issues, and then I'll play with a little bit of positive. But differential is not an efficient way to bank and turn the airplane. The rudder is going to be a lot more efficient in keeping that fuselage aligned to the airflow. So rule of thumb is less is more. Most planes, so I have a rudderless DLG that needs a little bit of reverse differential. Has a fairly chordy wing on it, and it has almost too long of a tail boom on it, and it just likes a little bit of opposite differential. But most of the time when I'm turning the airplane, I'm barely touching the stick for roll, but the mix is set high enough so the rudder's doing almost all. I mean, for rudderless, excuse me, the rudderless is not doing anything back there. So, the ailerons are doing all the work for the coordinated turn. So that one just needs a little bit of negative differential. It's a weird plane, but that's just what it likes. But that's just from just watching it. You put the airplane in a straight line and just bank left, right as clean as you can, see which way that nose wobbles in or out of the turn. So, hope that helped.
Thank you very much.
Other questions?
I got a question.
Oh,
I got a quick question on landing configuration. This is with an aileron and flap equipped airplane. The Osprey that I'm getting acquainted with right now, it's very new to me. I've got it set up so that as the flaps are deployed, the ailerons don't start down until about 50%, probably about 25% of the flap travel. And then the ailerons start down also. And I'm kind of avoiding crow, with full flap deflection. What's your opinion on crow and setting up ailerons and flaps in coordination with one another?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're pretty much on the right track. I mean, 10 years ago, a lot of people used crow for landing, but even Osprey, I've owned an Osprey, so I know what plane you're talking about. The flap surfaces got big enough so you don't really need the extra braking on the ailerons as much. But what you do lose when you start putting the flaps down is you start losing roll control real fast. And the crow configuration with spoilers doesn't really help that at all. So, I think your tactic of, having a mix of 50% flaps, most airplanes are going to slow down really well anyway. And then as you get more flap, you can mix in the down, cambers the wing, and slows the plane down. That's just, I got rid of crow quite a few years ago in all my planes, and I just used the, full trailing edge camber deal. So, but my flaps have to come down pretty far before the ailerons droop as well.
Okay.
But
yeah,
most planes will stop pretty well these days with just flaps, and I'd rather have more roll control.
The first time I flew this thing, I had a little bit of a crow built into it during about the last 20% of flap travel. And I got rid of that and just went strictly to ailerons and flaps being deployed. As I mentioned, at about 30% or so of flap travel, the ailerons come down a bit. But what I'm wrestling with right now is trying to get the amount of elevator mix with the flap/aileron deployment. I'm trying to get that dialed in. I just can't keep the thing nailed in smoothly on a smooth glide path. I'm like chasing it in pitch. Like when I first start the flaps down, there's not much effect on pitch, but then, maybe after about 15% of flap travel, the nose, I've got too much down elevator, I think, plugged in. The nose just really dips. Then as I continue to deploy the flaps, it gets a little bit more neutral. Do you have any recommendations on getting that flap to elevator mix dialed in?
Oh, sure. I just want to make sure you're using the right mix. What radio do you have?
Spectrum DX8.
DX8? So I think it's program mix. You have to make sure that you have a program mix set to your flaps that has the adjustable curve. Are you doing that with the adjustable curve? Okay.
Yeah. In fact, I've played with the curves.
Okay.
Trying, it's not a smooth curve. The curve actually looks kind of funny with the 5 points, but with kind of stepped look to the curve is when I get the best response in the airplane.
Yeah, you just have to play with that curve. I mean, if I look at the curves on all my different gliders, they're all completely different. So that's just an aerodynamic thing. How much is the flaps? How much are the flaps blanketing? The tail. And there's all these interactions between the flap vortexes and the tails and things like that. And all the curves look completely crazy. You just have to go and just launch and land, play with it, take one of those points and, take it the opposite direction, see how that goes. You just have to, you have to kind of see, how far that line is going down your curve and where those blips are occurring. So if you have, take your worst one, at, 20% flaps, if you're getting a really big pitch over or something, you need to see where that line goes as you move that stick and find that point and work on that one point first, get that set, get the worst one out of the way and then move to the other points. It's a trial and error thing. There's no easy way to really get it.
I've only got like maybe 20 flights on this airplane, so it's still pretty new to me. So I've got a lot of dialing in to do yet. Thank you.
Yeah, that's nothing. Try 100 flights, through those curves.
Well, since I have the floor, I'll have to ask my other question. So I have to do some snap flaps stuff, and I'm curious. I mean, I'm sort of barely even knew what it was. So I take it that's the elevator going up and down, and then the camber adjusts to coordinate the up and down a little bit with the elevator. And how do you do that?
It depends on the radio you have, but the snap flap is probably one of the most difficult things to tune. In Precision Tuning 1, which came out last year, I do cover a basic rule of thumb for setting up initial snap flaps, and that is you want to look at the reflex and the camber settings for your basic flight modes, for setting your flight speeds, from max thermal to reflex, and then at full pitch stick deflection, you want to set your snap flap to be double that. Okay, so if it's going down, say you have 4 millimeters of camber in the trailing edge, you want to set your snap flap at full stick deflection at double that, say 8. And that's just to start. But what you want to do is you don't want to have, the snap flap basically helps configure the airplane to the proper aerodynamic shape for your pitch change. So if you didn't have the snap flaps and you're pushing you've got the airplane going at cruise speed and you're pushing downwards, there's a little bit of delay between when the elevator moves and the plane actually moves. But the wing is in a pretty high drag situation if it doesn't get reflexed, because you're fighting against that camber, which is really set for, a different airspeed altogether. So one of the tricks of really getting these bigger gliders, especially anything over 3 meters, 4 meters, is getting that snap flap tuned in. Now you take your rule of thumb for doubling the camber or reflex setting, but you want to also have the rate set high enough so when you're actually moving the stick small amounts, which you usually are for flying, that you're getting enough snap flap to actually change the camber. Okay, that's clear.
Oh, another question. We're going to keep asking.
Paul, one last thing. You said you do own an Osprey. Do you find that reflex does any good for you on that airframe?
If I remember correctly, yes.
Okay.
Because most of our airplanes have, built-in camber. If you put a ruler on the bottom of the wing, in the cruise position, you'll usually see some sort of under camber in the wing. F3B plane for, higher speed range, you're not going to find that, but most of the TD sort of airplanes are going to have built-in camber, so you're already starting at a fairly high camber setting. even if the airfoil is in section. So when you reflex it, you're basically dumping that camber out. So
Okay,
that
gotcha.
can be very useful for, dashing, coming upwind, things like that. That extra drag of the camber really adds up.
Okay.
Oh, another question, John? Oh, he wants you to explain the picture in the background. I think I see 1901. So that's.
Yeah, I'll move aside here and I'll show you the whole picture. There's some lighting glare on it. This is the picture. It was taken in 1931. It's from a soaring book that my dad had, like a real authentic German soaring book, which was published in, I think, 1936, something like that. And the book is filled with these stone lithographs of these black and white pictures of gliders in Germany. And there's some really cool shots. And what I did is I scanned them in at super high resolution, retouched them, and then I blew them up as posters. So I have a couple more of these. So they're doing a bungee launch off the Wasserkuppe.
Yeah.
So you can see the silhouette of the guys, and there's the bungee as it's snapping, shooting the glider off.
It's amazing. Yeah, that's what I said. Okay. And the kind of another thing you mentioned, you said you were doing some new work on reading the air. Is it something you can talk about now, or?
Well, the video I'm working now is actually kind of a volume 2 to the precision tuning. We're diving into some, kind of finishing out the first one. The first one ran way too long. That's an extra footage, but there's, just trying to, dial in some of the most esoteric parts of tuning just to help people, figure out the handling and tuning of the plane better. So like I do a decollage change on an old Hobie Hawk to make it fly better and make it fly more modern. I'm going into...
That's a miracle, right?
Yeah. Going into the value of the new digital CG machines you might have seen out, which you just lay the plane on it and it calculates the weight, but also the CG position for you, which is kind of cool. And I've been playing around with one to see if they're really worth the $150 they cost. And but I think they do have some value, especially with building, so you can move the equipment around and see where the best place to put stuff in, especially with electrics. The placement of the batteries and servos and trying to get all the weight more concentrated towards the CG. That kind of.
So is it just balances the plane? Is that how it works, or does it? Because isn't there a lot? It doesn't actually figure out the CG.
Oh, it does.
Mathematically. Oh, it does.
It does. Yeah, the plane goes on 4 pads. There's 4 sensors. It works off an Arduino computer with some software in it, but there's 4 pressure sensors in it. And somehow you put the airplane on there, and you just hit one button, and it gives you the gross weight in grams. But you hit another button, and it actually calculates, because it knows where the wing is.
Yeah.
And it calculates where the center of gravity of the mass is on the machine. So, I'm seeing if it's accurate or not, because I know where the CG is in all these airplanes. And the first 2 I've tested, it was pretty close. Not perfect, but it was pretty close. So again, I think the use of these things are for like laying out gear, but also like when you're setting up a ballast system for an airplane to see how much the ballast system is changing the CG. Maybe where you can do some adjustments to make sure they, you're not getting an aft CG condition when putting 2 pounds of ballast in or something. So
yeah,
they might have some uses. I still use my fingers most of the time.
Yeah.
just yeah, that's about right, and then just fly it. Technology.
So as far as reading air, so that's basically just really fine tuning the setup, the reading air.
Yeah, 2017, I did it's called the Thermal Soaring Masterclass Series, and it's basically a 4-hour seminar where I talk about the most geeky aspects of air reading and thermaling and stuff like that, way beyond the basics, where you go, oh, there's a wind shift, and thermal goes, well, anyone who's at a pretty high level knows it's way more complicated than that. I go into a lot about when do the streamers lie to you? How are the streamers actually showing you how big the thermal is and maybe how far away it is versus just kind of where it is? I also discussed Joe Wirtz's vector method, which I have some issues with because the natural world is not mathematical whatsoever. And you're always trying to follow mathematical vectors, you know, in 1 second snapshot of the world, that might work, but on a thermal field, everything's extremely dynamic and changing, and it's never the same twice. So I kind of go into, you know, when does the vector formula sort of work, and when can it fool you, and how to expand a little bit on that. But just really a lot about how wind affects the thermals. But also remember, we're not on a field with one thermal. We have multiple thermals. We also have you know, geographic things like hills and mountains and lines of trees and things like that, which really affect the airflow, and the, you know, just the pure aerodynamics of the airflow around the field can really affect, you know, how thermals are moving and predicting, you know, where thermal is going to go after 5 minutes. You know, is going to go left or right of your pilot position and things like that. So there's a lot of really subtle things. You know, ground signs are one aspect that you have to tune into, but the ground signs are only effective for a short period of time as the thermal's transiting through, or it's, you know, gone beyond its maturing phase and things like that. You know, and then really learning how to, you know, use your airplane as your sign in the air, and, you know, reading energy. How's the plane going to behave differently, hitting different parts of the thermal, you know, the core versus the edges, and you know, how to tell between turbulence and a thermal, because sometimes they can really feel the same. A lot of people get fooled, and, you know, deciding, you know, if you're starting to lose a thermal, which direction should I turn? You know, do you just guess, or just turn left always because you're comfortable that way, or, you know, other signs that are telling you that you really need to turn right? And, you know, once you learn those things, you can get, you know, pretty high percentage calls of, you know, which way to turn or which way to chase a thermal that, you know, you were in at 1 second. Everyone's been there. You did that one turn, it felt awesome. You did the same turn, and all of a sudden the air just feels like what happened is dead. You know, but what happened to the thermal, and how do you, you know, use what's happening with, you know, how does the plane feel tell you where that thermal went? And, you know, give yourself a good high percentage guess to where that thermal moved off to. So, you know, I get super, I've studied this stuff so in depth, and just, you know, going out experimenting, and, you know, 30 years of experience too, thermally. So.
Right, and so you always find thermals, right?
Yeah, I'm one of those guys that, like, if I'm not going up, no. So,
okay, well, I know.
In contests, people follow me, which is really annoying. So.
Well, I know we're keeping you up, being 3 hours ahead of us. But
yeah, I'll stay up as long as you guys want.
Okay. Any
Seriously?
other questions?
This is fun.
Well, I want to thank you, Paul, and let's give him a round of applause. Yeah. Thanks so much.
Good.
And
You guys can always contact me through the radiocarbonart.com website, and I spend a lot of my day answering emails and questions and things, so I have no problem helping people out.
So if you have follow-on questions, we could drop you a line.
If we,
based on the video.
It's
okay,
all
well, thanks.
Yeah, it's all about learning and just getting everyone better. So.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. We really appreciate your videos, that we've all just gained a lot from them. So thanks so much.
All right, guys.
Okay.
Bye.
Good night.